Welcome, everybody. It's time once again for the next chapter with Charlie Hedges as he explores turning the page on his life and yours. Hey, Charlie.
I believe today we covered very fresh ground on an entertaining and informative show with labor law attorney Teresa McQueen. What Teresa learned early in life as a blackjack dealer in Las Vegas, she has used to transform her hugely successful law practice. Now she even spreads her intelligent, never so insightful wisdom as a podcast host on Workplace Perspectives. Our show begins with Teresa describing her professional journey, and in doing so reveals one key idea that may be the secret to her success and to yours as well, and that is civility, an infrequently used word that just means be nice. Teresa has discovered measurable good results in the courtroom and in business and in life in general simply by relying on a habit of having respect for the needs and positions of other people, even the attorney sitting across the aisle. How does that message apply to you and me? Well, listen to this lively and informative conversation with attorney Teresa McQueen. Teresa McQueen, as an experienced and successful attorney, you seem to bring a fresh and apparently very successful approach to labor law when you explore focusing on relationships as being equally important to success in cases that are usually lose-lose for both parties. That is not what is often known in the legal profession. I'm so pleased to be able to have this stimulating and insightful discussion with you on the next chapter with Charlie.
Well, thank you, Charlie, for having me.
Yeah, you have a show on this same station as I, and I checked out one of your shows. I'm a bit intimidated. You are so good. You are such a good host. And so now I have a new standard to live up to.
Oh, that's very sweet of you.
Thank you. Now, before we get into our topic of your fresh vision for the courtroom and for working with colleagues on the other side of the aisle, I think our listeners might be interested, and you have a very interesting, and I put somewhat curvy path to get where you are today. Can you sort of walk us a bit through that? Because I found it quite fascinating.
Well, it's a bit meandering.
Yeah, that's what I said, curvy. Meandering's a better word. That's why you're the attorney and I'm not.
No, it's very curvy. So the law for me is actually a third career. I have an undergraduate degree in dance. So my first career was as a dance teacher. My second career was in entertainment as an extension of my arts management degree that I got as part of my undergraduate degree. In that role, I worked for a very large hotel casino, doing special events and entertainment concerts and all kinds of interesting things. And in the, I don't want to date myself, so I'm not going to tell you.
I'm going to say you're not old enough to do all this stuff. I've seen your photos. You're just not old enough to do this stuff.
So there was a downturn in the economy before our last downturn in the economy. And downsizing became a thing, and I got downsized. And so at that point, I thought, well, I didn't really want to go back to dancing. I thought, well, I want something a little more secure. So I thought about either psychology or law. I think I should have gone with psychology. It's a lot of the same thing. But I went with a law degree. So I went back to law school, and I have been a lawyer ever since.
Chapman University.
University School of Law.
So you picked a pretty good institution.
I did.
Yeah. And so then you must have worked for some law firm, but then you started your own law firm.
I went solo right out of law school, and I did that for about 3 years.
Okay.
And then I met what would become my law partner, Neil Pedersen, through some work, volunteer work that we did at the Orange County Bar Association. And I basically picked my practice up, which was transactional at that point, and set it down in Neil's litigation firm to do some of their transaction work. But as what always happens when you work with people who love what they do. And Neil and our other partner, Dan Heck, they loved to litigate and they were very good at it, and it became contagious. So I ended up starting to litigate, and we had a need for an employment law litigator. So I sat down with Neil and I had a conversation about taking on that role, went ahead and did that and started litigating in the employment law arena. And I did that for the majority of my career. In 2016, I decided that while I still enjoyed litigation, it was never a long-term goal to be, to retire in the law as a litigator. Litigation is very stressful. It is very confrontational. It's very adversarial, and it can take a lot out of you. And I thought, well, I want to switch my focus while I'm still enjoying it. It took a lot of time, a lot of introspection. I basically told my law partner he had to kick me out of the firm because I really didn't want to go. But I did want to make a change. So in 2016, I went solo again, this time with a bit of a different aspect. I didn't want to litigate anymore, but I did want to stay in employment law. So I opened a firm called Sapphire Legal, PC. And my idea was to try to help clients ahead of the curve or get ahead of the curve. So my clients were not clients that came to me and said, oh, I've just been sued. My clients were the clients who came to me to say, we think we may have a problem, but we're not sure. Or we're looking at this situation and we'd like to know how to handle it. How can we handle it? Mm-hmm. Because my philosophy, I noticed so many times sitting in deposition and with calls that I took for potential clients that communication was really key. My focus in employment law was representing plaintiffs in court, but we were a very small firm and we also did employment defense work. My partner Neil and Dan Heck both did employment law defense work, but we're a small firm and everything that went out the door had my name on it. So I was a part of all those conversations about strategy and what issues our employers were facing. But in listening to both of those perspectives, I realized that, wow, if the relationship had been better, if the parties had treated one another with a little more respect, with a little more consideration, we might not be in this situation, because the majority of the people that I talked to on the plaintiff side, on the employee side, really felt more morally wronged than legally wronged. In other words, they were calling about the way they were treated by their employer. I was, humiliated. I was terminated, but I was terminated in front of all of my colleagues. Right. Or, they're trying to get me out, so they have wrecked my career, basically. They, all of a sudden, sometimes employers make bad decisions when it comes to terminating employees, and they feel that if there's an employee they want to get rid of, they forget we're an at-will state. And as long as it's not a wrongful reason, you can terminate the person. So they feel they have to have documentation. So all of a sudden, an employee who's been a long-term good employee, good performance reviews, all of a sudden can't do anything right. And employees are not stupid. They know what's going on and they feel powerless. And at the end of that relationship, they have a problem with that. They feel morally wronged about it. They feel terrible. And they think that the employer shouldn't be allowed to do that. So those relationships are important. How those relationships end, or how employers and employees deal with one another during that relationship, is super important. And I realized at that time that was what I wanted to do. Those were the people I wanted to help. And part of doing that, I thought, I went and got certified as a business etiquette trainer through the Emily Post Institute. And that's kind of a funny story as well. I was on the board of directors for the Orange County Bar Association, and we did a retreat one year. And we had someone in town who was a communications person who was also certified by the Emily Post Institute and came to talk to us. And during this presentation, I kept thinking, wow, I could do that when I retire. I could go, be an etiquette trainer, and that'd be really fun to do. And when I was thinking about transitioning my career, it just seemed like such a good fit to be able to talk to employers about civility and professionalism and ethics in the workplace, as a means of improving those relationships. So I bumped up my retirement plan and went and got certified as a business etiquette trainer and added that into my practice.
I love it. I had written down as a question, and you've so adequately addressed it already, in that you speak freely about a personal conversion. It's not a religious conversion, but it's sort of it's a very soulful conversion, and where you discovered that the aggressive bulldog approach, and you refer to it as litigation, and I don't know all of our listeners really familiar with litigation. That just means you take a case to trial, and so you are in court in front of a judge and jury, or just judge, whatever. Is that not correct?
Yes. So there's different ways to practice law. One is transactional, where you just represent clients in business transactions, mergers and acquisitions, or sales of business, intellectual property, that sort of thing. And litigation is where you represent clients in court in front of either an administrative judge or a civil judge.
Okay. And so you discovered that because you say in the litigation, there really is an entire sort of emphasis on this aggressive bulldog approach, and you just did not feel that was the best option for attaining most effective human legal decisions. Isn't that right?
Yes. So from my perspective, everybody wants to hire, as we say, the bulldog, or the most aggressive attorney they can find. That's who I want to get. But my experience has been that someone who is that completely adversarial is not necessarily effective. Someone with that attitude, we call it scorched earth litigation, meaning, burn it all behind you as you go. It's not very effective, because if you can't maintain a good relationship with your opposing counsel, it is adversarial, but it's not about me and the other person personally. It's about our clients. It's about representing our clients. And if I can't speak to the other attorney in order to move this litigation forward, it's a problem. It drags out the litigation. Everything takes longer. If you burn those bridges, you can't get the cooperation you need when you need it. For example, there's a lot of things that attorneys can do. Once you've got a trial date, a lot of deadlines start happening. And you can work yourself up against a deadline. You may need an extension. You may need a favor. You're not going to get those if you burn those bridges with that opposing attorney, or you don't get along, or you've never been able to get along. And that's not going to serve your client well, especially if it's a favor that your client needs. Then that translates into the courtroom, because judges see that. They know what's going on with the relationship. They can tell you're standing right in front of them.
That's what they see all the time. That's the norm, is it not?
It's not the norm, really. I know people think that.
Oh, but, really? Correct.
Well, this not getting along. That's what this scorched earth sort of way of doing business in the courtroom. It's not all that. That's not the norm. There are people out there who do that, and it does happen. We've all run into difficult opposing counsel, but for the most part, it's professionalism. Because again, it's not me personally against the other person personally. It's about doing our jobs and representing our clients as best we can. I think sometimes that unnerves the client, where we can go into the courtroom and do battle, and then come out and say, shake hands and say, nice to see you again.
Yeah, I want to talk about this. I'm going to take a little detour, and I want to talk about this, because I think this is really important, and I think this helps us not just in the courtroom, but I think it helps us in life. And my disciplines that I follow, there's an aspect that is absolutely essential, and that's the discipline of detachment, and that we need to detach emotionally from a situation, but not to detach from outcome. That outcome is still important. If I can detach emotionally, where I'm not hung up and I'm not taking personal offense. I'm not taking everything so personally that this is a fight against me and this is a fight against, this is two people playing a role. And I'm curious because in your role, it seems like you have to be so client oriented. How did you discover the wherewithal to be detached, to see that from a sort of not quite unbiased, but sort of human perspective? Where did you discover that ability? That's amazing.
Well, I don't know. I think that's an interesting question because I think it has to do with the kind of person you are. I used to practice. We used to have an attorney in our office who took everything they took on all of the clients' woes and worries and concerns personally and just really risked burning out. I've always been able to separate that. Most of our clients on the plaintiff side, of course, had lost their jobs. They were in bad positions, and I could appreciate that and feel for them, but I didn't take it on personally. And I think that's just the nature of being a part of the profession. Because if you take everything on, you're not going to last very long. No. I learned that as a business and executive coach that I could not take on their woes. I could feel for them. I like to think of myself as an empathetic and compassionate person, but I do not own your issues. They do not become my issues where I'm fighting my issues. And so my ability anyone's ability to detach from that. And it's a very difficult concept to explain, Teresa. Anytime I try to explain detachment, I find myself fumbling and mumbling over what it is, but I know emotionally what it is. I know I'm emotionally detached, but not emotionally detached from the person. I still care about the person, but I don't take things myself so personally, and it's not my responsibility to fix everything. It's in other hands. I mean, it's my responsibility to do my job as well as I possibly can, but I have little to do with outcomes. Right. And that's kind of our job as well. I've always, whenever I get a chance to talk to younger lawyers, it's verbiage. It's training yourself, even the words that you use. I had a wonderful mentor in my senior partner, and we never got up in court and said, we. So that's kind of a weird way to say it. But when standing in front of the court, it was always my client, not we. Now, that's not to say that we weren't a team, the client and I, because we talk about that, the fact that we are a team, we're in this together. But I always made a point, and I talk to young lawyers about making a point that you are not they, you're not them. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful separate, point. Yeah. You are separate and apart, and you need to be, because you can't put yourself in that role in that manner. And again, that's a mindset. And I think it's a training. It's just sort of a way of training yourself as well. I don't know how many jury trials you had if it was strictly a judge, but I could see how that would definitely impact a jury and confuse a jury. If you use the term we rather than my client, is who's on trial here? What are we doing here? It would because and you risk that too, because if the jury doesn't like you, but they like your client, then does that confuse them? I do think there's something to it. And I do think that the clients need to stand on their own, especially in a jury or a bench trial. So bench trials are strictly in front of a judge. The trier of fact, whether it's the judge or the jury, needs to see the client for who the client is. And are they going to, do they connect with that client? And the way they connect with that client is the way that I paint the picture as a litigator. So it's the words that I use. It's the evidence that I've gathered, the facts that I present, how I present the facts. I had a colleague who said it really great, had a great way of putting it. So it's our job to paint the picture for the jury. And we do that by using facts and colors and our voice and our mannerisms and all of that. We're painting it up on a canvas for the jury or the judge to look at. And I think that's important. And that portrait that we paint sits behind the plaintiff in the, on the witness stand. So it sits behind them. So, they're seeing that as a reflection. They're not looking at the attorney and judging the attorney and making decisions based on, who the attorney is presenting themselves at. You want to always make sure in court that everybody's looking at the client, whether you're defense or plaintiff. You don't want the jury staring at you unless it's opening or closing remarks. Any other time, you want them paying attention to the client.
So intrigued, I don't want to let this go. So now what I want to do is I want to appeal to the wannabe psychologist, Teresa McQueen. How do you, because I think this will help so many of people listening to this podcast, how do you take that principle and apply it to your personal life? That a principle I'm calling it detachment, that a principle of, well, let's just call it detachment. Do you apply that to your personal life as well?
Well, it's funny you should say that. It's very tough. I'll give you an example. When I was younger, I took a job right out of college working at casino as a blackjack dealer. And you have to go through training.
No kidding.
I had a lot of
fun. That's great.
It was pretty cool. So you go through training, of all things. But one of the things they tell you in training is you don't apologize, which makes sense because you're taking their money and they don't want you to apologize.
Oh, I'm sorry I'm winning, you mean?
Yeah. Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, I'm so sorry. It sends a really weird message. So, and at that point, I was a young person and I use the words I'm sorry all the time. It was just a phraseology with me. It was a verbal tick, they call it. I would just, oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, I'm sorry about that. Oh, yeah, I'm so sorry. It was just part of the way I spoke. And it was harder than heck to stop saying it. But I did because I wasn't allowed to, they don't want you saying it. So I stopped doing that. And going through my life since then, since I am no longer in that situation, I really stop and think before I apologize for anything, whether it's in my professional life or my personal life. So I guess I've taken the same tact with, detaching from things. So I guess in a personal life, at least for someone like myself who's married, I get to balance that out. So when I'm detached, if it's a situation that calls where I really shouldn't be, I've got someone I can rely on to sort of take up the slack, and help me out with that. But it's tough. I think it's very much a situation where you have to be able to separate your professional life from your personal life.
And I think there's two sides. Well, there's at least two sides to I'm sorry. There's an I'm sorry if something happened to somebody. There's an I'm sorry this happened to you. And I'm not talking about the car dealer now. And then there's the I'm sorry that's mea culpa, forgive me, I've done something wrong. Those are two very different uses of I'm sorry and two very legitimate. And we just have to know when is appropriate to use each one, and to rather than just say I'm sorry and leave it at that, is say I'm sorry for. I'm sorry this happened to you. I feel for you. Know I care. Or I'm sorry I was a jerk. Can you forgive me? I wanted, I want to behave differently. And I think if we say, I'm sorry, why, it helps the receiver a whole lot.
I agree. And I think that stopping and thinking for a moment about what am I apologizing? Am I apologizing? Or am I simply expressing sympathy or empathy for the situation that you find yourself in?
Yes.
And taking that moment to think about that is important. Because you don't want to take on more than you're responsible for, whether it's you're actually doing it or whether you have to be mindful of the psychological impact of taking on that burden of being sorry for something that you either have no control over, or maybe the situation doesn't call for you apologizing.
Okay, we've covered my sidetrack. I love it. You were great. Way to go with me there. Let's take a break, and then we're going to get right back into your subject, okay?
All right.
Hi there, this is Charlie Hedges, and you're listening to The Next Chapter with Charlie, and my very special guest is attorney Teresa McQueen, who is so experienced and really not a renegade, but she has her own views of what happens between client and between the relationships in a courtroom or outside a courtroom. And I want to pursue something Teresa is known for on her show that just so intrigued me that said, I have to, this is why I had to have Teresa on the podcast. Right now, Teresa, I want to have a bit more of an intentional discussion on a subject that is lost in our country today. It's totally lost in our country today, and we need it desperately. And that is the idea of, can we just be nice? I was led to believe that you say in trial work or in depositions or in whatever you're doing, that if people were just nicer, you wouldn't have a job. And that will never happen because, first of all, you'll always have a job. And second of all, people are not going to be nice. But I would love for you to talk about, what does being nice mean to you?
On the civility side of things, the nice factor is sort of interesting. I think when I was litigating, my feeling was if people had just shown more civility, professionalism, respect for the person that they were dealing with, I think that things would have been different. I could see how things would go differently. As far as being nice, it's a good way to put it. I kind of laugh because when I do civility training, I end up saying at some point, like, I'm not the nice police, and I'm not here to tell you to be the nicest person in the room.
Oh, really? Really?
Yeah, because, I'm an attorney. I can't always be the nicest person in the room. But what I can always be and always strive to be is professional and civil, courteous, and show respect to the other person. Again, simply because it's, that's my work environment. I want to make sure I have a work environment that I enjoy working in. And if I have at least professional relationships with, opposing counsel or the people that I deal with on a daily basis, that's going to make my life better and hopefully make their life better as well.
Yeah, there's a noun you've used that I like a lot, and I like civil or civility. I don't hear that word. As a matter of fact, you're the only person I think I've heard that word in feels like a decade, and yet it is an essential notion, is it not? I mean, it is sort of a basic, fundamental human value of civility. Of there is a decorum that works, as we talked about. The bulldog mentality doesn't work, and that person that does not possess civility and is the bulldog cost everybody more money with not so good results. It's just, it's all negative when we try to work together to find out something that we have a difference of opinion and we have a difference of position, but we can try to find some point of agreement that, yes, this is fair and let's move along. I love the idea of civility. Where did you come up with that?
Well, that's part of that business etiquette training. It's all about civility and building professional relationships, really, or your personal relationships. It works both ways. The concepts work both in a professional capacity and in a personal capacity. On the professional side, so on the business side, the idea is that everybody has a job to do. Everybody's got goals. Everybody has tasks they have to accomplish. And the fact of the matter is, you're just not going to get along with everyone that you work with. It would be great, but it's just not going to happen. And I think there's a lot of circumstances where we find ourselves, sitting next to someone day after day that we don't particularly care for. But the fact of the matter is, everybody has a job to do, and we have to find a way to forge at least a professional working relationship so that you can get the job done. You can get your job done. They can get their job done. You enjoy at least coming to work. You're not dreading it. So the best way to do that is to take that idea of civility, the idea that we need to act in a way that's going to build this professional relationship, have a positive impact on it, to treat this person with consideration, respect, and be as honest with them as we possibly can in our interactions, and do what's going to build that relationship, build that trust, because that's what's going to break down. If you try too hard to have to like everybody you work with or have some personal connection with people you work with, and you can't find it, you're going to be stymied. And I think the idea that you want to build that professional relationship, have some distance, is a good thing. I think it's been a very interesting swing, I think, in our work life. If you think about our work relationships used to be very distant, very formal. And we've sort of swung way the other way to where now it's very casual work environment, and everybody wants to know, what'd you do on the weekend, and how was your vacation, and all of these sorts of personal things. And they want to know about your spouse and your kids and all this kind of stuff. So we've swung really far the other way. And I think we need to come back to kind of like a happy medium. I think there's a way to connect with your coworkers on a personal level, without getting too in the weeds on it. Maintaining that professionalism, maintaining that distance is kind of helpful in a way. It allows you to focus more on the work than the high school atmosphere that some office cultures take on when they become too casual, too informal.
Teresa McQueen, you've got to hear me on this one. There's a book in there for you. There really is. There really is. I mean, I think that is a very powerful thought. I think it is totally ignored. The younger generation, wants more of that, but the younger generation is also very independent and very sort of isolated, and so they can understand that. Maybe we'll co-write it. I love it. It's a great concept. Let me tell you a story of something that reminds me of. Where I heard when you say you could have somebody in the cubicle next to you that you absolutely dislike. Where I first heard that term was in a monastery. The abbot of the monastery said, our life consists of living with people that we absolutely cannot stand. But we have made a lifetime vow of staying in this community and figuring out ways of how we can work together, because that is what human beings are. Human beings are at odds with each other. Rare are those people that we just fit so greatly with. We're going to have issues with people. And I have another example that just happened in my life that proves your point or explains your point. I had a relationship with a charity, and still have a relationship with this charity. And I was on the board, and I was vice president. I was vice president of the board, and in charge of a set of operations. And the CEO, I was sort of his unofficial coach, his unofficial supporter. But that was very difficult, Teresa. I was wearing two untenable hats. I was wearing one hat where I'm supporter of the CEO, and the other hat, I'm vice president of the board that's evaluating his performance. So you see it. I mean, you get the tension. And so my decision was to resign from the board. I resigned from the board. I resigned from my position as vice president of operations, and I am now, and that was all volunteer, I am now compensated consultant that is the leadership development and strategic growth advisor consultant. And it makes me now where my only goal is the CEO's success. And it is making him to be the best CEO possible. But in that process, I have the right to challenge him. I have the right to say, this is not working. If you do this, you are not going to be the leader you want to be. I can do that as a supporter and as somebody that's on his team, a truth teller on his team. That is kind of it's always been, I don't know if it's been my blessing or my curse. People who have been in groups with me say, you never have to guess what Charlie Hedges is thinking. He's going to tell you. And so I will be a truth teller, but it's a truth teller in love, and it's a truth teller in, I'm saying this for your good and for the benefit of the organization, not as somebody you're reporting to. Do you see how that was so helpful for me to resign as a board member?
Yeah, I think it says a lot about the choices you make. You decided that, helping this person to improve who they are as a leader and their position in that organization and to help the organization in that way was more important than sitting on the board in that position. And I think that's what it's all about. It's kind of run into the same thing with clients, and I have the same privilege now. I've gone, I closed my solo practice and I went in-house with an organization in October of last year. Mm-hmm. And it's been a very interesting experience. And when I had a great client in my law firm, was one of my very first clients that I got. So I had it was fresh with this whole new idea that we're going to, introduce civility, and we're going to, stem these problems before they start. And I really found myself falling into more of a traditional role. I got one client and they were struggling with some issues. And I kind of fell back into this traditional sort of, defense lawyer mindset. And I had to stop myself and say, okay, wait a minute. I truly believe that this, treating these people, going with the relationship issues in this and turning this relationship around and focusing on how they do this relationship is what this company needs, as opposed to how do we get rid of this person? Because that was not my client, right? I didn't want a client that would call up and say, okay, so we're having this problem with this employee. How do we go about terminating them? My thing was like, well, where you're at right now, it's going to be a problem. So let's see what we can do to, maybe that won't be necessary. Let's work on that. But I had to really talk to myself and say, okay, this is of value. This will work. You just got to hang with me. And the client was wonderful. They're like, well, we like it. We like that. We like how, how that's going to protect us. And we like how that's going to look to our other employees. And we like how that's going to impact our culture overall if we integrate that. So that was a really great moment. And then being able to go in-house and to talk about those types of things as well, to talk about, there's not a typical attorney conversation about, you start to speak the language of HR with HR, and it's wonderful because you're talking about improving the workplace culture, and you're talking about making those employees, even if we have to let them go, you're talking about the way that we do that is important. It matters. We can't let that slide just because it's the end and we just want to get it done. So it's been a great opportunity to be able to focus on that aspect of it and kind of take off the traditional hat for a few minutes.
It's great observation. When I first began, it wasn't executive coaching at the time; it was business coaching, and it was in the mid '90s when that, people would ask, "What do you do?" And I say, "I'm a coach," and they say, "What team?" And I say, "No, you don't understand. I'm a business coach." But you know what I was hired for originally? I know I caught the feel. Is that many times they were not interested in improving the player. They were interested in mitigating against wrongful term.
Right.
If I hired you a coach, we can go to court and we can say, we hired you a personal coach and you couldn't pay attention to what the personal coach had to say. And I had a very different approach. I said, look, I won't accept that role. I'm here to try to help that person make it. And so I'm going to do everything I can. And we have to work together on this. And if we can't work together on this, then I'm not your guy. I'm not your coach, because I'm not going to just, play the game. I'm not going to play in that. So, that was true. I don't know how, is that like 30 years ago or 20 years ago? It's a lot of years ago.
Well, but it's still a mindset. And what comes to my mind is, this was a really interesting time in 2016 when I left the firm and opened my solo practice. The EEOC came out with this task force report about sexual harassment. it had been 30 years since Title VII was signed into law, which Title VII at the federal level prevents harassment, discrimination based on protected classifications like sex. Okay. So they came out with a report. The report said, in 30 years of attempting to eradicate sexual harassment in the workplace, we have failed. We failed. And the reason they failed was because so many years of training was defense orientated, meaning it was risk averse. So the training was all about risk aversion for the company. Don't do this. Don't do that. Employees tune out because they're like, well, the only reason you're doing this is, to cover yourselves in case of litigation. You don't really care about the perception was you don't care about eradicating sexually harassing conduct in the workplace. All you care about is checking the box. And the EEOC's report in their, what can we do to fix this now that we know that we failed? Their main contribution to that conversation was introduce civility back into the workplace, or introduce civility into the workplace. That's the only effective way of eradicating sexually harassing conduct in the workplace in the eyes of the EEOC and task force who studied this issue. But it's true. If you take that professional attitude, that civility, like being mindful about what you say and how you say it and who you're saying it to, of course that's going to improve things, because you're not just speaking out of turn and not caring whether you offend anyone, or not caring whether that racy joke might not be funny to everybody, or not everybody finds your sense of humor to be that great when you start talking about race or national origin or something like that. I always thought that was just
brilliant,
amazing.
Brilliant.
But it's that wrongful, turning it the wrong way.
Yeah, and it's not about culture change. It's about CYA.
Yeah, and that's not effective. It's just not an effective means of changing a corporate culture that's going the wrong direction. It just won't work.
I think I told you when we chatted before that, and we'll kind of wrap up with this. As most of my listeners know, I'm a student of the Bible, and although it's much more of the mystical, late medieval mystical theologians tradition, from the 1200s to the 1500s, and it's not transactional, it's very transformational. As I read the Bible a couple of times, a handful of times, and I walked away with two truths out of this, I don't know how many page book, a lot of pages, thin pages for thick books. and
like the tax code. Ever seen the tax code? Like
I think the Bible is probably easier to read than the tax code.
Yes, it is. I've tried both.
Yeah. And there's a word that, when asked about what's important, Jesus said, love God and love your neighbor as yourself. And I took those and I put those in English in my terms, was two things: believe in the goodness of God and be nice. That's it. That's it. Nothing else. Forget everything else that is said. And I like that instead, because I like to put shoes on it, put leather on it. And love your neighbor. What does that mean? Be nice. Be civil. I may start using this word civil more than nice even. I like it. Thanks to you teaching me that. Teresa McQueen, what a delight to learn from a person so willing to explore, learn, and then apply your learnings to the good of your clients, for the good of your adversaries, and I believe for the good of the world at large. You are a special woman with a special gift, and I only wish for you growing influence in our troubled world.
Oh, thank you so much, Charlie. It's
been
a pleasure.
Tell me also, I'll put it in show notes, but how can people get in touch with you?
So I can be reached through our show, probably the easiest way to do it. So my podcast is Workplace Perspective. So I can be reached at tmcqueen@workplaceperspective.com.
Okay. I will get that from Paul, and I'll put that in the show notes. And thank you once again. I also want to thank everyone for tuning in to The Next Chapter with Charlie. Check out our website, thenextchapter.life. And until next, this is Charlie Hedges signing off. Bye for now.